What's interesting, looking back throughout the years, about half of my bucks, my mature bucks that I've shot, have been those part-time bucks, and they're non-core bucks. And what I mean by that is, almost every buck is a part-time buck, meaning the land you hunt, whether it's public or private land, that buck is just there for a moment in time. That moment could be an hour, could be days, could be weeks, could be months, but he's not in that same place all year long because he requires different habitat all year long. I always talk about during the summer time, he needs cool overstory and shade. That's not the type of cover that he needs in the fall. He needs thick security cover. He can't smash his velvet antlers through that thick cover. At the same time, he needs fall food, not summer food. And so there's a distinct difference there. And that's why in small properties, a lot of times, whether you want to or not, you don't have the resources to try to offer food in the summer, habitat during the summer, and then shift it all around to the fall and provide fall habitat and winter habitat, which is the opposite of summer habitat, and still expect to actually have an impact on the deer herd, whether it's health-wise, building-wise, hunting-wise. It's hard to stretch your resources thin and be good at any one time period because, again, it goes back to bucks are on your land just a portion of the time, part-time, and there are those bucks that are severe part-time bucks. And what I mean by that is they're living somewhere else for the bulk of the fall, but then they come over to your land during the rut and some other key time periods, and you have to be very patient to not go after those bucks until that time. And what's interesting is that those bucks, if it makes sense, they can be very definitive on when they will be back to your property. So to me, what I found going back to, again, that half of my bucks going back, half of my target bucks have been these part-time or non-core bucks. They can really lead you to success at a very high rate of the time because you can count on them being there just for a very small moment in time. And I'm going to talk about how you can capitalize on that moment of time and hunt them effectively and efficiently with a high degree of success this fall. The first thing, again, food and cover. On your land, whether you're hunting private or public land, you need to find those food sources and cover sources that are there during the fall and the winter months. I'm looking for high stem count cover. I'm looking for clear cuts, good hardwood regeneration. On private land, you have to have those food plots. Don't rely on ag in those areas. You have to have high quality food in that location. And it makes sense when you get into those areas where you don't have ag, it's even more important because deer don't have food, or at least the food is a higher impact because deer do not have quality food at every turn like they do in ag land. In ag land, you have to be different. You have to offer something different. In public land, you have to find that food source of the moment, which often boils around hardwood regeneration, brief moments of white oaks dropping early, then red oaks if you have mass production, and then going back to that hardwood regeneration. And you can have deer flip-flopping from a mile apart their cover choices and food choices during that time of year, especially on public land. On private land, you can actually work on your land very hard, take a lot of time, and dictate that those deer are going to be on your property or focusing on your property during the daylight for a longer time period, which allows you to hunt them more effectively. But it all boils down to that food and cover. You have to have that fall food and cover. It has to be going good for you. And really you want that spaced out around your entire property. That does not mean that you're improving every square inch of your property, but you're improving 50 to 60, 70% of your land. That's that core area. It's contiguous. You can get in and out of that, off to the edges where you're protecting that core area, but that core area includes food and cover spread out throughout your entire property. Because if half of your land is in summer cover, you're not really doing anything for the deer herd, and you're not maximizing your potential of your land and your investment. And you get down into Texas, some of the arid areas of the Southwest where the summer is a limiting factor. You need to have quality summer forage in those areas because that's the worst time of the year during drought for deer. That's a tough time. But in the rest of the world, in the rest of the whitetail world, and the rest of the country, and I'm saying 80% of the whitetail habitat, summer is not the lean portion, and I would say probably 90% is not the lean portion of the year. Winter time is a limiting factor, the lowest hole in the bucket. So you really have to pay a lot of attention to fall and winter and make sure that your property is at your maximum during that time of year so that you can actually create an efficient parcel that is making use of all of your acres, so you're not dedicating habitat to the wrong portion of the year where that portion of the year does not actually have a direct impact on the health of the herd, your ability to create a quality herd or create a quality hunt. So it really boils down to fall and winter. And it's hard to have a good fall property without winter, or winter versus fall, because if you have great food in the fall and winter and great cover, that'll expand into the winter time. And let's face it, if you send the deer into the winter, even to the northern regions, with a full belly, and you do that with high quality cover and high quality food, then you're going to have healthy deer throughout the winter, and they're going to be able to withstand that winter, even if that food supply runs out in the winter time. There's always an annual whitetail shift, and it's something I've been writing about for a decade or more. It's something I recognize, experienced, and I call it the annual whitetail shift. And what I mean by that is that bucks during the summer shift to their fall range. And that's really, I'd say, annual whitetail shift. You could actually say annual buck shift, because does and fawns, you find where they're there during the summer, they stay into the fall, and there could be a little bit of an overlap, but does and fawns have a lot smaller home range than bucks. So where does and doe family groups might shift 200, 300, 400 yards from summer to fall, and they're happy staying in that home range area, which is just a fraction of what a buck's is. That buck is willing to travel a mile, mile and a half, and we see that consistently. And you get to big wilderness areas, heavily wooded, hardwood areas, then you'll even see that shift take place over a longer period in a longer distance, where bucks might even shift from 2 miles plus or more, 2 to 3 miles. They just have a lot more range that they're going to cover to find that fall food, that quality fall food. So they're going to shift anytime from middle of September to middle of October. And that's where you see those bucks coming, and that's where a lot of people that have summer properties see those bucks leaving. Like here, we're going to collect bucks in the fall. We found 22 sheds so far in Minnesota on the land around here, on the 245 acres that we actually own. And so with those sheds, we collected a lot of bucks that held into the wintertime, and those bucks weren't there to a high degree during the summertime. And I'll show you, this is Venti, a buck we're after. He should be 4 this year. He was a 14 point as a 2.5 year old. This is when he was 2.5 years old right here. You see the 7 points on here. He was a 21 point last year. He had some double drop tines. We can't wait to see him this year. We don't know what he is. But it's interesting, I was talking to Dylan, and we have very few pictures and videos of Venti throughout the summer months. They were really scattered. Why? Because he lives in his summer habitat. We don't care where he's at right now. We'd like to see him occasionally. We'd like to see him growing. But bottom line is, we just want him back in the fall, because we can manage Venti in the fall as a part-time buck and as a core buck at that time, because we're collecting them within that annual whitetail shift. But we can manage Venti in the fall. We can't manage them in the summer and the fall, even with 245 acres that we have. We really have to focus our efforts on the fall, because once that annual whitetail shift takes place, we want to be the ones collecting the bucks in the area. And then for that, we are going to be the herd influencer in the area, not the person where that buck stayed in the summertime in summer habitat. Number 3, history of buck use. This is where a lot of non-core buck intel comes in, and you have to study this, because those non-core bucks and those bucks that are just there for a brief moment in time on your property are typically only producing a few trail cam photos or videos throughout the years. I've had bucks where there's been 12 to 15 pictures over a 3-year period, yet I went to a stand at the right time of the year expecting to shoot that buck and shot him, sometimes without even getting any pictures that year at that current time, just knowing he was alive during the summertime, knowing he was alive the previous winter, the previous season, knowing no one shot him, and then going into a stand expecting to see that buck, because that's when he told me he'd be there for 3 years based on those camera photos, and then shooting that buck the first time into a stand. It seems like a shot in the dark. It seems like a needle in a haystack, but it is not. He's told you that he's going to be there for 3 years, and that's that history of buck use. What we find, what's really interesting, is that just with a handful of photos, he'll tell you, I'm a part-time buck, I'm a non-core buck, meaning I'm not living on the property, I'm not in and around the property during the daylight, but I'm going to be back at the right time. You need to sit for me. It's going to be just a few days out of the season, and he's going to give you that opportunity at that location. We'll talk about that in a second, that rut timing and that sweet spot where he's going to show himself. Number 4, if you've identified a buck like that, he's coming into your property just a handful of times, he's telling you exactly that he's going to be here at this time. But you have to preserve those stands. If you're after a particular target buck on your land or on public land, and he's coming into that area at a specific time, and that time is often 10 days, 2 weeks, 3 weeks total throughout the entire year, then you can't go in and burn those stand locations out and affect the deer use in that area prematurely. Because imagine that buck coming in and there's no other does, there's no bucks, there's no activity, there's no sign, there's no rubs, there's no pellet count, there's no scent. Not very welcome for him to stay in that area. And especially if you're there leaving your scent prematurely, deer are spooked out of that area, deer are circling that area, they're not entering that area because you've created a bubble of hunting pressure that is basically telling the entire deer herd, whether it's a part-time buck or not, to stay away from this area. A big buck's going to recognize that, an older buck, a wise buck, he's going to come into that area and know that something's wrong. So you have to preserve those stands and know that this stand should be saved for that particular buck. I had a particular non-core buck that I set up for in 2011. Really nice drop tine buck, 160-inch buck, and a handful of pictures of him. He told me he wasn't going to be on the land or in the daylight at that time. And even then, it was just very infrequent pictures. But he told me it was going to be there during the middle of the rut. And so I hung a stand for him in early November, shot him the first time into that stand, and I didn't even feel the need to hang a stand earlier at that time because I could just go in there, put that stand in, get out, and then go at the right time a few days later, and that buck was none the wiser. And it worked out. And a few years of just, I think it was 12 pictures of that buck led to being able to shoot that buck. And again, it seems like a needle in a haystack, but it is not. The rut timing is critical. So look at that rut timing, and we'll flip over to right here, that rut timing. Here's the rut timing. Let's say a lot of times the pre-rut will start October 20th through the end of the month of October, depending on where you're at. And I'm saying October 20th, 22nd in Wisconsin, Michigan, New York, and then you can flip that down to the end of the month in Kansas, all the way over to southern Ohio, Kentucky. We were looking at the rut beginning the end of October, early November, as opposed to October 20th. What's interesting about that is a lot of times those mature bucks are ready. The young bucks don't have a clue, and the mature buck use is not going to pick up heavy during very warm, hot, dry, windy, stormy conditions. It's going to pick up when it actually gets cool. And what we notice a lot is check out your water holes. You get a lot of afternoon, evening use of deer bedded in their dry bedding areas all day, and then they're hitting that water on the way to food in the evening. That could happen just about any time of the year, especially during dry times. But when they start hitting it during the rut, when you start getting pictures, you begin getting pictures at 10 o'clock in the morning, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, that tells you the pre-rut's on, and they start moving when there's cooler temperatures. So you see that major temp drop on October 21st. You see water hole use start to pick up, and that's a great time to go in for the kill on some of those bucks that are core bucks and in and around you. But a non-core buck or a very small part-time buck, during that first rut, until you get up to that peak of the rut right here. So that's what I look at as the peak of the rut, right here. So that peak rut timing right here, that could be more the 15th, 18th in Ohio, southern Ohio, all the way over to Kansas. That could be November 7th, 10th, and I'm talking about activity. You know, that cold weather does not cause does to come into estrus, but it causes bucks to be more active because they're comfortable. And so that pre-rut begins that timing. You get into the peak rut period right here. That's when you start looking for those non-core bucks. So what I'm looking at is you start getting that time where during that pre-rut, that first 10 days, somewhere around in there, that buck might breed 1 to 2 does. And then it starts getting competitive because as the number of does increases, bucks find does everywhere, but at some point during that rut, and you get in that peak rut period, those bucks will leave their traditional home core areas and really start to range out. And when that happens, that's when they've told you for a few years, I'm going to come back during the peak rut, whether it's the 6th through the 15th, 18th in your area, more southerly and later, more northerly and earlier. And during that time period, let's say it's 10 days. Let's say from the peak rut to the end of the rut, it lasts another 10 days. Let's see, the primary rut lasts 3 weeks, just the average activity levels. I'm not really looking at when does are bred because there can be trickle ruts all over the place. But I'm just looking at that peak rut timing. Then you're looking at that period where it's 10 days, starting right around the peak rut and then after. So I'm looking at in Wisconsin where I'm at, that would begin the 4th of November, 5th, 6th, where you start really getting those bucks that now it's been 10 days, 2 weeks into the rut. They've bred a couple does and they're going to leave their core areas and start looking for somewhere else. 10-day window. There's usually 1 to 2, 3 good weather days during that time where that buck's going to leave his core area, travel a mile to your area, and then you're going to get an opportunity with that buck during that time frame. So now you've only had 12 pictures of him. You've had very infrequent pictures. You know he's alive. He's telling you, I'm going to be back during the peak rut for about 10 days. You look at the weather. Again, I use the HuntWise app. That's a weather algorithm, HuntCast formula that I helped to develop, something I've used for 3 decades. And you look at that window, and if you check that 10-day forecast, you're going to find that you have about 2 to 3 good days, and you're going to have comfortable cruising conditions. It's cooler. The winds are moderate. There's probably a break in the weather. There is strong weather. He's not going to cruise a mile when it's a blizzard condition or heavy pounding rain, thunder, lightning, storms. But he is when the conditions are cool and clean and the bad weather subsided. Still could have moderate winds. But if you look at that forecast, you're going to have 2 to 3 days. You go out to that stand that you've set aside. You have fall food and cover. You've preserved that stand. You've recognized the use in that area. You know there's going to be that whitetail shift at some point. That's why bucks leave, move that area. And it might even be with that annual whitetail shift. You might have bucks that have left your area, but because they're a part of your wheelhouse and they've been there in their summer, you have this small window to shoot them during this rut timing sweet spot. You go out to that stand that you've saved, and he comes right by and you shoot him. It's not a needle in a haystack. He's been telling you he's going to be back at that time for 3 years, 2 years, 4 years. You wait for that perfect weather opportunity and you go in and shoot that buck. That also happens during the secondary rut, the third rut, and also over late season food sources. You could have the only food in the area. You're still a part of his territory, but he has a large territory, that mature buck and that non-core buck. That time where he might come over, if you have great food, you still have good cover, good fall cover. He might be back during that late season archery hunt, muzzleloader hunt, and on your property, and all of a sudden that buck's back during that late season because he spent a lot of time in his core area. He's bred some does. He's ranging out during the primary rut, the second rut, the third rut, and then also during that late season if you have that quality food source and you get an opportunity at them. Preserve those stands. Make sure you follow and scan and analyze the history of those pictures you have in trail cam photos or sightings, rub sign, scrapes, whatever it might be, and then hit that sweet spot and go in and find an opportunity, create an opportunity for that buck of a lifetime that's been a non-core, extremely part-time buck that's giving you very little intel, and plan on going to that stand and have a very high success rate of harvesting that buck, because you understand that part-time doesn't necessarily mean you're not going to find an opportunity at that buck. In fact, if you're hunting hard and hunting for a lot of years, you might find that those make up half of your bucks or more of the type of bucks that you're going after and targeting and finally connecting with throughout the years, throughout the decades. And it's a simple concept, and of course it's the opposite of hunting core bucks that are there in and around. You know, the best time to hunt a core buck is when he's there. And so if you're getting pictures of him during the daylight, around daylight, don't wait till the rut, because someone else like myself, hopefully like you, is waiting for that buck to come back to their property during those brief moments and give themselves an opportunity and an outstanding part-time buck. And I think you can find one this year. Check it out, and don't worry if you miss that pre-rut time, if you miss the lead up, the build up to the peak rut. You have a lot of opportunities to shoot those bucks from a long distance away. Try it this fall, and I think you'll be happy that you did. Well, I'm real excited, folks. I appreciate you watching this video, but my next web class, how to plant food plots, how to design your food plot program, is out. And it really goes through a step-by-step process for not only how to plant your food plots, but why you should plant them, where you should plant them, what you should plant, how you should create them. There's a lot of different modules. Ends up about 30 videos altogether. I urge you to check that out. We're out here completing our food plot work today, and we do that in a pretty strict pattern so we can find success this fall. Food plots shouldn't be a guessing game. take the guesswork out of food plots and food plots planting, and check out the web classes. I have my How to Design Your Whitetail Property, the food plots for the next web class in the series, and I hope you enjoy it. I hope you check it out, and let me know what you think if you end up purchasing that, and I think you'd be well pleased that you did.